I froze the moment she said it. My daughter had just asked me to sign something, and something in me, I don't know what, call it 68 years of living, told me not to move. Let me back up. My name is not important right now. What's important is that I am a 68-year-old man who spent 41 years working as a general contractor in Charlotte, North Carolina. I built things, homes, additions, commercial spaces. I built them with my hands and with the men who trusted me enough to show up at 5 in the morning. When my wife Nadine passed 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer, she left me with a paid-off house, a small rental property on the other side of town, and a silence so loud it still wakes me up sometimes at 3 in the morning. After she passed, my daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, that's the only name that matters here, moved back home with her husband. She said it was to take care of me. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. When you're alone in a house where someone used to hum while making coffee, you will believe almost anything that sounds like family. Her husband, I'll call him my son-in-law, was a man I never fully understood. Not in a suspicious way at first, just the way some people are hard to read. He sold insurance. He dressed well. He always had an answer ready before you finished asking the question. Nadine never warmed to him. She used to squeeze my hand at the dinner table sometimes when he was talking. Just a quiet little squeeze, and I understood what she meant, but I told myself she was being protective. That's what mothers do. They moved into the house in the spring 2 years after Nadine passed. My daughter said she was worried about me being alone. She said the drive from their apartment was 40 minutes and she hated not being able to check on me. I said I was fine. She said, "Please, Daddy." So I said yes. For a while it was good. The house had noise again. My grandson, he was 4 at the time, used to run down the hallway in the morning and bang on my bedroom door. That boy saved me more times than he'll ever know. But things shifted, slowly. The way water gets into concrete and you don't see the damage until the wall cracks. My son-in-law started asking questions about the rental property. Casual at first. How much was it bringing in? Did I have a property manager? What was the mortgage situation? I told him it was paid off, same as the house. His eyes changed when I said that, just for a second. The way a man's eyes change when he sees something he wants. My daughter started talking about estate planning. She said it in that gentle, reasonable voice she uses when she's already made up her mind. She said I needed a living trust. She said the probate process in North Carolina was a nightmare, and she didn't want things to get complicated and she paused there when the time came. I told her I already had a will. She said a will wasn't enough. She said her husband had done research. She said we should meet with an attorney. I said okay. I didn't think much of it. The attorney they found was a man named Whitfield. He had an office in a glass building in South Charlotte, and he shook my hand like he was testing the bones in it. He talked fast. He used words like revocable trust and successor trustee and pour over will, and he handed me papers while he was still explaining the previous papers. My son-in-law sat beside me nodding. My daughter sat on my other side. I remember thinking that I was the only person in the room who was confused, and I didn't want to look confused, so I nodded too. I took the papers home. I told them I wanted to read everything before I signed. My son-in-law said of course. My daughter said take your time. But over the next few days I noticed them watching me, not obviously. Just the way people check on something they're waiting for. Now I have a neighbor. She has lived next door to me for 22 years. Her name's Beverly. No, wait, Beverly is on that list. Her name is Claudette Odom. She is 71 years old. She is a retired paralegal, and she is the nosiest, most opinionated, most wonderful woman I have ever been exasperated by. Nadine loved her. Claudette used to come over and sit at our kitchen table, and the two of them would talk for hours about things I had no interest in, and I would sit there reading a magazine feeling like the luckiest man alive. After Nadine passed, Claudette kept coming. Not every day, but often enough that I knew she was watching out for me the way Nadine had asked her to. She never said that out loud. She didn't have to. About 3 weeks after the meeting with Whitfield, Claudette saw me sitting on the porch with the papers in my lap. She came over without being invited, which is her custom. She sat down in the other chair. She looked at the papers. She said, "What's all that?" I said my daughter was helping me set up a trust. She said, "Can I see?" I said, "Sure." I wasn't thinking anything particular about it. I was just tired and I figured another set of eyes wouldn't hurt. Claudette read for a long time. She read slow and careful, the way people read who understand what they're reading. I watched her face. After about 10 minutes, she looked up at me. Her expression was, I don't know how to describe it, like she was trying to decide how to say something that was going to hurt. She said, "Who is the successor trustee on this?" I said, "My daughter and my son-in-law jointly." She said, "Who has the power of attorney for financial decisions?" I said, "My son-in-law." My daughter had explained that it made sense because he handled finances. Claudette set the papers down on her knee. She looked out at the street for a moment. Then she said, "And this section here, section 14, do you see this? This allows the trustees to transfer real property out of the trust for estate management purposes without requiring your signature after the trust is established." I didn't say anything. She said, "Do you understand what that means?" I said I thought I did. She said, "It means that once you sign this and put both properties into the trust, your son-in-law can move those properties without your consent. Legally." I felt something cold go through me, the way cold air gets under a door you thought was sealed. I said, "My daughter wouldn't." Claudette put her hand on my arm. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with those eyes that have seen 22 years of my life, and she didn't have to say anything. I sat there for a long time. That night at dinner, my daughter mentioned that the attorney had a cancellation, and we could go back in on Thursday to finalize everything. My son-in-law said it would be quick, just signatures. My grandson was throwing peas across the table, and my daughter was telling him to stop, and the whole thing looked so normal. I looked at my son-in-law across the table, and he smiled at me. A good smile, a patient smile, the kind of smile a man uses when he's waiting for something. I said, "Sure, Thursday sounds fine." But after they went to bed, I called Claudette. It was 10:30. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need you to help me find a different attorney." She said, "I already have one in mind." Her name was Patricia. No, that's on the list too. Her name was Gwendolyn Marsh. She was a 63-year-old estate attorney who worked out of a small office in Concord. Claudette had worked for her firm 20 years ago. Gwendolyn looked at Whitfield's documents for about 15 minutes, and then she took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She said, "Who prepared this?" I told her. She said, "Has this firm worked with your son-in-law before?" I didn't know. I told her I didn't know. I told her I didn't know. She said, "The language in Section 14 is not standard. Most revocable living trusts include a co-signature requirement for any real property transfer while the grantor is living. This one doesn't. That's not an accident. Someone asked for that language specifically. I said, "What does that mean in plain English?" She said, "It means if you sign this, you are handing two paid-off properties to a trust that your son-in-law can effectively control, and you will have limited legal recourse to get them back." I thought about the rental property. I thought about the house Nadine and I had paid off together, the last mortgage payment we'd made when we were both 55 and she had cried a little, and I had held her in the kitchen. I thought about my grandson running down that hallway in the morning. I said, "What do I do?" She said, "You don't sign anything yet. You tell them you need more time, and then we draw up your own trust with proper protections and a separate attorney of your own choosing." Then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Sir, I want to be direct with you. If your family has good intentions, they will understand the delay. If they don't, you'll know by how they respond." I drove home and I sat in my car in the driveway for a while. I looked at the house. It was dark except for the porch light Nadine had always kept on. She always said she didn't like coming home to a dark house. I kept that light on after she died. My son-in-law had asked me once why I still ran up the electric bill and a porch light all night, and I hadn't been able to explain it to him in a way he seemed to understand. Wednesday night, the night before Thursday's appointment, my daughter knocked on my bedroom door. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed the way she used to when she was a little girl. She said she was really proud of me for being so organized about everything. She said she knew it was hard to think about this stuff, but she was glad we were doing it together. She said she loved me. I looked at her. My daughter. The little girl who used to climb into bed with us during thunderstorms. The young woman who gave the eulogy at her mother's funeral without crying until the very last sentence. I loved her so much, it made it hard to breathe. I said, "I love you too." I did not say what I knew. The next morning I called my daughter before she came downstairs, and I told her I needed to postpone. I said Gwendolyn. I didn't use that name, I just said my own attorney. Had some questions and I wanted to get them answered first. I said I wasn't trying to make things complicated. I said I just wanted to understand everything I was signing. My daughter's voice changed, not dramatically, not in a way that screamed anything, just tightened, like a knot pulled one notch too far. She said, "Your own attorney? Where did that come from?" I said I'd been talking to Claudette. There was a pause. She said, "Dad, Claudette is not an attorney, she's a neighbor." I said I knew that. I said Claudette had connected me with someone who was. Another pause. Longer. She said, "I really wish you had talked to us first." I said, "It's my property. I wanted my own counsel." She said, "Okay." She said, "Of course." She said she just wanted to make sure I wasn't being confused by someone who didn't understand the full picture. She said she would talk to her husband and they would reschedule. That evening, my son-in-law came and found me in the garage. I was doing nothing in particular, just standing among my tools the way I do sometimes. He came and stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. He said he heard I had some concerns. He said he wanted me to know that everything they'd set up was for my benefit and my protection. He said Whitfield was a highly respected attorney. He said they only wanted what was best for me. He talked for a while. I listened. He was very smooth. He always had been. When he was done, I said, "I appreciate that. I'm just going to have my own attorney look everything over." He nodded. He said, "Sure." He said, "Absolutely." And then he said, "You know, the longer we wait on this, the more exposure you have. Estate taxes, probate costs, these things add up." That was the pressure. Right there. Dressed up like information. I looked at him. I said, "I've been managing my own finances for 40 years. I'll be okay for a few more weeks." He held my gaze for a moment, and then he smiled and said goodnight. Over the next 2 weeks, things in the house got quiet in the wrong way. My daughter was polite but distant. My son-in-law stopped joining us for breakfast. My grandson didn't know anything was wrong, thank God, and he still banged on my door in the morning, and I still got up and made him toast. Gwendolyn drafted a new trust. Queen. Protections intact. I retained the ability to revoke, transfer, or encumber any property as long as I was living. The successor trustee was my brother-in-law, Nadine's brother, a man named Samuel who had known me for 35 years and had no interest in my properties and no agenda except that he promised his sister he'd look out for me. I also, quietly, had the rental property's lease agreement reviewed. Gwendolyn found something there, too. The management company my son-in-law had recommended 3 months earlier had a clause that redirected rental payments into an escrow account pending estate administration, another thing I hadn't understood when I signed it. We voided it and found a new manager. When I presented my daughter with the new trust documents, mine from Gwendolyn, she read them at the kitchen table. My son-in-law sat across from her. He read over her shoulder. When they finished, they were quiet. My son-in-law said, "This is a lot more complicated than what we had before." I said, "It protects me better." He said, "This trustee, Samuel, he's not a financial professional." I said, "He doesn't need to be. He's family, the kind that's been around for 35 years. There was a long silence. My daughter looked at her hands. She said, "Daddy, we were just trying to help." And here is the thing that breaks me, even now. I believe she meant that. I believe some part of her started out meaning that, and then her husband got involved, and the meaning shifted the way meaning does when money gets in the room. I believe she loved me and also let him lead her somewhere she should never have gone. I don't know how much she knew. I don't know if I want to know. I said, I know you were. And then I said, I think it might be better if you two found your own place. I'll give you until the end of next month. My daughter started crying. My son-in-law did not. That told me something. The end of next month came. They moved to an apartment in Gastonia. My grandson cried when they packed his room. I held him in the driveway for a long time, and I told him that Grandpa's house was always going to be here, and he was always going to be welcome. I told him I would pick him up every Saturday and we would make breakfast together, just the two of us. He said, could we make the round pancakes? I said, yes, buddy. The round ones. Every Saturday. He said okay and got in the car and didn't look back the way kids don't when they trust you to still be there. My daughter called me 2 weeks later. We talked for almost an hour. She didn't bring up her husband's name. She didn't explain or defend. She just talked to me like my daughter, which is what she is. I don't know what the future looks like between us. I know it will be slow. I know it will take time. Some things that crack don't disappear. They just need to be rebuilt from a different angle. Claudette came over that evening after the call. She brought over a sweet potato pie, which she makes every time something significant happens in her understanding of life. She sat at my kitchen table, same chair she's always used, and I told her everything. She listened. When I was done, she cut us each a slice and handed me mine. She said, Nadine would be proud of you. I held that for a second. Then I said, she would be furious it happened in the first place. Claudette laughed. That big laugh that fills a kitchen. And I laughed too, which I hadn't done in a while, and it felt like something coming back to life. I still keep the porch light on. I always will. I've been thinking about what Gwendolyn said, that good intentions reveal themselves by how people respond to being questioned. I've been thinking about how long I almost didn't question anything, how the love you feel for someone can make you so willing to believe them that you stop reading what's in front of you. I know I am not the only one. I know there are people listening to this right now who have felt someone they loved quietly move the boundaries on them, and they are still trying to figure out whether they imagined it or whether it was real. It was real. You didn't imagine it. You are allowed to get your own attorney. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to say, I want to understand this before I sign it, and anyone who loves you will respect that. Anyone who doesn't respect it is telling you something you need to hear. My house is still mine. My name is still on the deed. My grandson makes round pancakes with me every Saturday, and he's getting pretty good at flipping them. And every single time I watch him standing at that stove, I think about how close I came to losing all of this without ever knowing it was leaving. Don't let the quiet ones take anything from you. The love that's real will wait for you to understand it. I still think about the moment Claudette set those papers down on her knee and looked out at the street before she said anything. That pause. I've come to understand that the pause was her being kind to me, giving me one last second before the world I thought I was living in changed shape. Here is what I know about how things unfold. At least in my experience, the consequences were already in motion long before I saw them coming. The clause in Section 14 didn't appear by accident. The management company didn't get recommended by chance. Those things were built piece by someone who was counting on me not reading carefully. And the reason he was counting on that is because he understood something about love, that it makes you want to trust, that it makes reading the fine print feel like an insult to the person you're reading it about. He used the best part of me against me. That's the thing I had to sit with. What saved me wasn't luck. It was Claudette doing what a person of genuine character does. She told me the truth even when it would have been easier to say nothing. She could have looked at those papers, thought it wasn't her business, and gone back inside. Nobody would have blamed her, but she didn't, because that's not who she is, and I think about that a lot now. about what it means to actually be good. Not good in a comfortable way, not good when it's easy, but good when it costs you something. When Claudette knocked on that door, it cost her something. It cost her the ease of staying out of it. That kind of character is rarer than most people think. And Gwendolyn, a woman I'd never met before, reading documents written by someone she'd never met, and she told me the truth clearly and without softening it to the point where it lost its meaning. She said what I needed to hear in plain English. That took intelligence. Not the kind that comes from credentials, but the kind that knows what matters and says it directly. The kind that doesn't get confused by what's polite when what's needed is what's true. The part that required something from me was the hardest part. Knowing what I knew and still having to walk through that kitchen every night for 2 weeks, watching my son-in-law say goodnight to me and saying goodnight back, sitting at the table with my daughter while she talked about rescheduling and letting her talk. Some people would call that strategy. I call it endurance. I call it the steadiness you build over 6 decades of doing hard things, laying foundation in January, renegotiating contracts you thought were final, sitting at a hospital bedside for 3 weeks and still showing up for work the next month. That kind of staying power doesn't come from anywhere except choosing, over and over, not to quit. What I didn't do was collapse. I didn't pretend everything was fine in a way that gave up the truth. I didn't sign. I didn't rage. I just kept standing where I was standing and made sure the ground under me was solid before I took the next step. My grandson flipped a pancake by himself last Saturday, almost perfectly. He looked back at me with this enormous pride on his face, and I thought, this is it. This is what I held on for. Not the properties, not the deed, not the numbers on any page. This boy and this kitchen and this Saturday morning. Everything that is real will wait for you to protect it. You just have to have the courage to read what's in front of you.